Welcome, dear chess friends, to part 4 of my series on the Catalan. By now, you should be familiar with this position already. We have looked in the first 3 videos at black capturing the pawn on c4, and then in one way or another, setting up the pawn structure with a6 and b5 to support this pawn on c4. And while quite interesting, these defensive concepts haven't quite worked out for black, and one of the reasons for this is that not only will you lose time playing a6, b5, but invariably black will have another problem with the rook on a8 that bishop on g2 will look at once the knight jumps to e5. So today we are looking at knight c6, which is the start of a line that has been very popular on the highest level, with people like Aronian and Kramnik taking the black side on this one. And the main point is that after white castling, black has rook b8, getting the rook out of the long diagonal and preparing b7, b5 to support the pawn on c4, and that would be a very efficient way to keep this pawn on c4 alive. This is why white is basically forced to play queen a4. It's the only way to directly try to recuperate this pawn on c4. And of course, after black plays dc4, he's not gonna give the c4 pawn up without any fight. Goes bishop b4 check, bishop d2, the point is knight d5. Still keeping the b4 square under control and stopping the white queen from getting into contact with the c4 pawn. So white takes, and now it would seem that a3 is straightforward and good, kick the knight and then take on c4, but here black has the very nice resource b5, and we get into a forced sequence of moves: knight c2 check, king d2, bishop d7, and eventually white is giving up the queen for 3 pieces, and it has turned out that in this position the black queen finds immediate targets for counterplay, namely f2 and basically the whole king side in connection with checks against the white king. So a3 is not the solution. Let's go back. We continue with the development, and maybe now we would like to play a3. So black has to do something about this, and now every move is becoming quite important, because it's really the key question strategically if white manages to easily take back this pawn on c4, have more space in the center, and just be strategically better for the rest of the game. So a6 doesn't work on account of knight e5, using this pin, and also the fact that b5 is not possible, because then again everything is hanging on the long diagonal. And if instead black goes bishop d7, there is still knight e5, because knight takes e5 is met by queen takes b4, and if black is hanging on to b4 with a5, then in this position white remains with a very strong bishop on g2 and is now ready to play a3 and finally kick the knight away from b4. So the best move for black is rook b8, as before, getting the rook out of the long diagonal. And on top level, the curious move knight a3 has been very popular, but I'm gonna suggest more straightforward and I think a better way for white to play. And let's also note that now knight e5 is not good, because black can simply take the pawn on d4 and no serious damage happens after something like this, because, well, the rook is safe on b8 and b2 is hanging in white's camp as well. So instead of knight e5 or knight a3, I want to go knight c3, renewing also the threat of just going a3 and picking up the pawn on c4. So now finally black is ready to play a6, And if you don't do anything immediately, then after b5, black will be more than happy. So we go knight e5 using the pin on the diagonal here again. Black has to castle. And here we give up our proud bishop from g2, destroying black's pawn structure completely. And we get to this position. And the main theme from here on is the difference between the bishop on c8 and the knight on c3. Right now the bishop is really completely locked in by these pawns. And of course in the long term the black c-pawns are weaknesses that will create a big headache. Of course the straightforward decision for black would be to take on b2. White occupies the open file, exchanging the active rook. For instance, rook b1, rook b1. If black tries to be canny, playing rook b6, and of course white cannot take on b6 because this would undouble black's pawns, and c6 is not even hanging because d4 is hanging as well. And this is also not what we are looking for. What we are looking for is to keep the structure as it is and not let black free himself. And black's next move would probably be something like queen d6, and white has the very powerful queen c5, keeping black completely in the box. It's quite unclear what black should even play, and white is ready to either just strengthen his position with rook d1, f3, king f2, like getting ready for an eventual exchange of queens, just bringing the pieces closer to the center, or to play rook b3, and after doubling on the b file, increasing the pressure on b6 so much that black will be compelled to release the tension. But let's look at quite an instructive game where black took immediately on b1. Now queen d6 is logical, there is no better place for the black queen. And black intends to play e6, e5, freeing finally the bishop from c8. So white goes f4. Rook d8. Oh. White penetrates on the b file. And black has nothing better than to try to bring his king closer so that the pieces will all protect each other. Now white has put all the pieces in the right squares, and it's time to make some progress and transform the position. So finally this knight on c3 is gonna show its muscles, and we go knight e4, of course heading for c5. And after queen d5, we're happy to exchange queens and be left with a very powerful rook on b8, knight on c5 against completely ineffective black pieces. The extra black pawn on c7 is completely immaterial. And let's just see how play continued. King e7, king f2, f6, toying with the idea of going g5 for e5 one day. White goes rook e8, just getting ready to one day take this pawn. And also, after potential bishop d7 from black, white would be happy to keep the rooks on the board, maybe just take with the rook on a6. So that's why rook a8, h6, e3, putting the pawn on the right square, rook e8. Now the white pawn is matching up because eventually he'll be going to queen, bishop d7. Now finally black has moved and white has a choice on how to pick up material. First going rook a7. And white decided to still strengthen his position because black doesn't really have any useful move here, being tied down to the defense of c7. King e2, king d3, so now the king is flexible to also go further on the queen side, but simply very well placed in the center for any further action. Black takes and finally has some small idea for counterplay, running the h pawn down to h3, and then if he gets lucky he can try to give up his whole queen side and bring the rook to g2 and hope that the h pawn creates some confusion. So white of course stops this, also blocking the black pawn on a square that is the same as the bishop. And black is simply out of moves, goes a5, forcing white to take this pawn and activates his rook. But he's still very far from getting any counterplay. And here white took some time to find a way to finally break through, because it's not possible to improve the position at all actually. So white has to look for a way to transform his advantage, the much better placed pieces, into something tangible. And this was f5 in the game. The idea being that ef is met with knight d7 and rook f6. And all the black pawns are weak while the a pawn is gonna create a lot of headache. So instead black didn't take on f5 but bishop c8, and after rook c6 basically black was completely collapsing, and the knight was always untouchable because bishop e6 would be made by rook a6 and then rook takes e6. And then quite quickly white wrapped up the game with pieces easily attacking all of black's weaknesses. And eventually white converted without difficulty. So this was the end of the game. Let's go back quite a bit to the position after queen takes c4. So of course there's a lot of theory even in this position, and the black players realized that rook b2 leads to more or less a hopeless defensive task for black. And the black players started to try queen d6. And here let's look at a few straightforward options for white. This will make clear what the black idea is. For instance, after e3, trying to get the same as before, black finally gets to carry out e5, and when he frees his bishop, it's not only just that his bishop is coming out, but the white king on g1 will also start feeling unsafe about all the weaknesses around him. So here black is doing fine, and the most popular move here is actually knight e4. After knight e4, queen d5. Taking on d5 doesn't work as nicely because here black has the very strong ed5. The point being that now when white would like to take control of the b file, there is bishop f5 stopping this completely. And after knight a6, rook a8 and taking on a2, black will keep a very active rook on a2 that guarantees enough counterplay. So let's go back again. It turns out that b3 is a very strong move for white and actually not that popular. Now of course white is about to completely consolidate himself, just playing knight e4. After b3, black actually needs to act immediately, because if white consolidates his position, then black doesn't have anything to show for his horrible structure. So the obvious move is rook b4, and e5 doesn't really help black here that much because of the rook fd1, ed4, queen d4. We are about to exchange queens, and then the white king is completely safe, and all that matters is the bad queenside structure. So after rook b4, play is very concrete, knight e4, and after rook c4, knight d6, get to this kind of position. Again, the queens are exchanged, so that white's king has no headache anymore whatsoever, and is actually happy to join the other pieces in the center anytime. And what's interesting here is that black has the d file, but the d file is completely useless because there is no entry on d2, so there is no way to actually penetrate and attack anything. While white is about to get onto the c-file and then start getting all the pieces into place, and when he starts attacking the pawns on c6 and a6, that is already going to be the beginning of the end for black. So let's see how a game developed. Rook fd8, rook c1, g6. Now white takes space and control over the dark squares to make any e6, e5 basically impossible, and getting the king also into the game. So bishop d7, king f2, bishop e8, now doubling the rooks on the c-file, and black finds it difficult to make any meaningful moves. And as I said before, when everything is in place, white starts attacking the pawns, and immediately the position becomes very bad for black. Black tries to exchange a weakness with a5, f4. He is not allowed to do that, because we just want to pick up the a5 pawn for good eventually. g5, king e3. Black cannot keep his rook on d4. Rook d5. White decides to take a bit more space, and black didn't see anything but playing f6, but dangerously weakening the 7th rank. And after e5 and the strong move f5, black was already lost, because his king on g7 is in very bad shape, and there are a lot of weaknesses: f6, c7, a5, h6. So let's back up again. After knight e4, there's also another option. Queen takes d4, but getting to a very similar type of position. White is happy to play f3, still keeping d2 under control, creating a route for the white king. Now after rook fd8, rook fc1, we would see similar things to the game we just saw. And of course you may ask, why not just to play e5 given the chance, and let's try to attack this knight on e4. Of course that's logical. King f2, bishop f5, but we will not allow the exchange. And the knight is immediately attacking the weak a pawn. And here white uses the opportunity to take one pair of rooks off. And then quite nicely with e4 all pieces can get into the center, king e3. And now white is again ready to go rook c1, remove the knight, go knight d3, and then all the pawns are again gonna be weak. And basically in the long run it's not possible for black to hold on to all of them. So one game where Grandmaster tried to defend black's position went f5, but that is kind of a sad move, because now another pawn will be in the way of the c8 bishop. Knight c5. Black's idea was quite concrete, going e5, king f2 and rook f6. Rook fd1, rook h6. And here white actually got nervous and just defended the pawn on h2 with king g2, but after h4 nothing would be happening at all. And black is actually looking at the same kind of treatment that we've seen in this line. So what was supposed to be a mainstream line for black with decent chances to equalize is actually quite a nightmare for black if we go into this type of endgames. And this pawn up is completely illusory, while slowly but surely black's bishop on c8 remains dominated and doesn't manage to take part in the game, while the white pieces coordinate very nicely, and when they start attacking the black pawns, it's already becoming too much for black to handle.